Looks like we're all ready to go. Okay, perfect. I'll call the December 22nd, 2025 Planning Commission meeting to order. We don't need to review the Zoom procedures. First is the approval of the agenda. If everybody could take a quick look at it. Let me know if there's any proposed changes. Hearing none, as for unanimous consent to approve the agenda, and it's approved. Next is to consider the minutes of December 8th. Let's take a minute to take a look at that. Let me know if there are any corrections or amendments that need to be made, please. You all read the minutes? Any changes, any corrections? Hearing none, the minutes are adopted. Next is comments from the chair. I'll just very quickly ride on the coattails of Tim, as noted in the last meeting. Tim thanked Mike and Meredith for their work and everything. I'd like to just echo that at the end of the year. It's been a busy year for the commission. We've done a lot of good work, especially with getting the city plan across the finish line. So I just want to say thank you to everybody that has been involved for the past year for volunteering their time and making very thoughtful efforts in working on the town plan, and also as we move forward in the next year in making these comprehensive revisions to the zoning standards. Again, I just want to say thank you for everybody. I know that there's a lot of things that we could all be doing every other Monday of our lives, but you all choose to be here, and I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to doing some more hard work with all of you. And hopefully, when we change the zoning, we can win an award for that as well. So, just want to say thank you. After that, it's continuing the work on the new zoning amendments, specifically with chapter 310. But oh, I'm sorry. General business.
Alan is on remotely. Alan Goldman.
Next is the general business. If there's any comments from anyone from the public, it looks like Alan Goldman is online. If Mr. Goldman or anybody else who is not here in the gallery has anything to say, please go ahead. All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is continuing work on the zoning amendments, specifically chapter 310. Thanks for those who responded earlier this week to sort of point out specific issues that Meredith might want to take some additional time to review in chapter 310. So with that, I will turn it over to Meredith to walk us through chapter 310.
Okay, so Chapter 310, special uses, structures, and parcel standards. So generally, Chapter 310 touches on either funky uses or structures that need a little extra explanation, or maybe have some requirements that don't fit in with your normal zoning district requirements or other sections, as well as a few other procedural or changes, maneuvers that might happen that don't fit into your other sections really clearly. A lot of this section relates to special uses that are commercial uses or industrial uses, things like drive-throughs, and things like neighborhood markets, which I've got to go back through because I'm not sure that actually fits in anywhere in the zoning at all anymore and matches up with anything else that's in here. There are some things that apply to residential uses. And so I'm going to try and focus on those since nobody flagged any of the others, but feel free to raise questions if you want to. I'm not going to go through section by section on this one because it's really long and most of it doesn't apply to residential at all. There are some things like wireless communication towers, those types of things that pop up in here. So for things that might apply to residential, the first section in here is probably the one we use the most, and it's the specific standards for fences and walls. They're very specific accessory structures. There are some specific standards that apply to them in the design review standards that we already looked at, and in height limitations in the accessory structure section, section 3003. But this is the main section, section 3101, that gives the specifics for fences and walls. And I don't see this as something that would necessarily limit people's ability to create new residential units, but it does come into play if you felt like you wanted to tweak it a little bit. There's some very, very specific limits on height, especially for front yard fences. There's some for side or rear yard, but the front yard fences are the most strict. I really think that was a policy decision on making, helping to create sort of cohesive neighborhoods, which is why that front yard fence is typically only allowed to be 4.5 feet tall so people can see over it. It's also, I think, a bit of a safety situation too. In your more suburban-y neighborhoods or just neighborhoods in downtown where you want people to be able to see the pedestrians who are on the sidewalk, and for people pulling out of their driveways, being able to see pedestrians, be able to see the cars coming. There are exemptions, especially for side or rear yard, and ability to get waivers if you need that higher fence for screening. If you need it because the house next door is higher and up on a hill, there's a bunch of different options. But this is one of the items where I see more waivers that do go to the DRB. Most of them are granted unless they're front yard. The front yard is really, really limited in what's being allowed. So if you look into that in detail and think you want to make some tweaks, let us know.
I'm just curious really quickly, why in 3101D2 there's a waiver that's possible for a corner parcel for 6 feet on one side? Like, why?
So that you're not making it like, I think it is for you've got a corner parcel, which means you have two front yards. We're not going to penalize you and tell you can't have at least one of yours be a little bit taller to like block out noise, help keep the balls in the yard, stuff like that. I think it's an equity type thing. Um, so the next section that I think really relates to residential, actually, sorry, I'm gonna take a step back. Just to flag, because this is a big picture thing that I think Planning Commission needs to be aware of, this community facilities section here, section 3103. This is about how zoning in general has some pretty strict limitations on it for what we call community facilities. So those are things owned or operated typically by the state or the city. It also comes into play if you actually go to the statute, for churches, for schools. Zoning is severely limited in what it can govern. And this doesn't list them all out, but in general, design review doesn't apply to those unless one of the allowable items is at issue. So say lighting or landscaping, those are two things that zoning can regulate for these types of of entities. And so if a church or even the city comes to me with, hey, we're doing this project, like there's all sorts of things I can't tell you what you can and can't do. If you're doing something with landscaping, if you're doing something with screening, if you're doing something with lighting, yeah, you need a zoning permit. And, unless there's some other exemption that applies. And yes, I do have to make you go through design review. And prior zoning administrators often thought that this meant that they were just exempt from zoning and just didn't make them do, get zoning permits at all. So that's been a learning curve for a lot of entities in the city since I came on, to just be like, nope, you actually, some of these things you do need to do come to us every time you have a project so we can double check. So then section 3104, this is accessory dwelling units. So these are that very specific statutorily defined type of dwelling unit that it's in here because they have to meet the standard to get some benefits from the state from funding. It's not because we treat them really any differently, especially now that the city has that. You can have up to 6 dwelling units as long as you have city water and sewer. It used to be this came into play because that exemption that now is up to 6 dwelling units was up to it's just a single family unit and an ADU. But we still need to keep this in here because if we're going to say, yes, you have specifically an ADU in our regulations and in our permit, that gives the state something to point to. We've already made that determination for them. It bleeds onto there. So I don't want to pull that out. And again, this is all based on state statute. So we try and keep an eye on the legislation in case they make a tweak to what the definition of an ADU is. We flow it down, but otherwise we leave this alone and don't play with it. I have a question. Do you guys want to hear about home office, home business, and home industry, or no, because it doesn't directly relate to limits on residential development and creating more units?
It didn't really catch my eye.
Okay. All right.
No.
Okay, great. Just figured I'd check. That's same with the, child daycare home and facilities. We have some where we regulate, some it doesn't really matter. So the group homes and residential care homes, again, that ties back to state statutes, so we don't really play with that. Gabe asked about camping and campgrounds. I think it was Gabe. Yeah. So, for the public, Gabe wanted to know about maybe modifying our camping provisions to allow for creative housing solutions. And that there are a number of ADU-like structures that could add housing, but are currently prohibited. So this camping and campgrounds sections, the 3108, 3109, these are about the uses, really. And yes, we are talking about camper units, campers, travel trailers, RVs. The key here and the difference between maybe a tiny home or something like that and camping is really the water and sewer. If something can get a state water and sewer permit and meet those requirements, I'm perfectly happy to call it a dwelling unit if it matches up with our definition of a dwelling unit. It has to have living space, place to provide food, sanitation, water, sewer, and meet those state requirements for water and sewer. We had to be able to allow camping for limited times that has that a different standard. We aren't going to require somebody to have water and sewer for their RV hookup right in their backyard to allow their neighbors to, family to come and stay there for 2 weeks. Campground, you got to have somewhere for people to be able to pump out their RVs, right? And it comes down to and have some sort of bathhouse. But it's not. We're perfectly happy to do tiny homes, right? The limiting factor is not these definitions of camping and campground. It's that water and sewer requirement. We can't have people just using buckets. It's a safety issue and it doesn't comply with state law. I do think that there are some issues with these two sections, and that I've had people come to me to try and work out how to, offer a 4-site, 3 sites as kind of what they would call a campground, um, or glamping or something like that. And there are some hurdles here for that. Um, and in a way, like if somebody could do a small sort of glamping situation and on property that they live on, it might make them easier for them to continue living there. But it's, like I said, when it comes to actual larger scale development of alternative types of housing, I really don't think these provisions are an issue. I'm happy to have somebody dig through it and come up with some other ideas if Gabe had some other thoughts on that route.
So Meredith, I had sent Mike just early on. I mean, I think so. The one thing I want to clarify, but one is just the period of time. Like I feel like, yeah, water and sewer, like that's important, right? But if somebody had a yurt in their backyard and people are using a bathroom inside the house, like I don't, whatever, 90 days, like maybe like the nicer weather, right? Like maybe it's 120 days. That was one recommendation. The clarification, and we don't need to decide this tonight. I was just wanted people to know why I was curious. I'm looking at like the wheel pad situation, which is a Vermont builder who does like accessible units, things that are on like a chassis, right? Those tiny home type things. My understanding is under the code is that they would be illegal because they aren't built. I mean, they're built to the RV code or whatever, right? But they're not necessarily built to like the home building code. But you're saying you would treat those if they get a water and sewer hookup, they would be legal. Is that what you're saying?
So you're talking two different things. There's the building code, and then there's the zoning. Okay. So for building code purposes, if it's on a chassis, Michelle is not going to like it doesn't qualify under building code. If somebody is planning to live there potentially year round or beyond the camping parameters, I would say it needs to meet the dwelling unit and have somehow meet water and sewer specifications. If the state ends up amending their requirements and composting toilets and gray water systems are fine for year round, to me that and they give a permit for that, that's fine. Zoning purposes, that's fine. And if it's on one of those chassis where you can just drive it away like an RV, it won't have to meet building code. That's Michelle. That's a different code than this zoning that we're dealing with.
Okay. Okay. So is the building code, that's state code or what is that?
That's a complicated question. I hate to say that. So the city of Montpelier, last I knew, but I am not expert on this, that's Michelle Savory, um, wasn't, I don't think is quite following the same code as the state. And the state's adoption of, say, international code is behind other states. There's some disconnect. So, I mean, that's, last week Michelle was literally going through and cutting out sections and taping them into her code book so that everything matched up. So I don't know what process changes to the building code take, if that goes through the planning commission and then city council, or if it just goes to city council. I'm not
Well,
100% sure
let
on
me
that one.
ask her. Let me float the question that I'm, again, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like,
Oh,
look,
I know 100% what you're talking about.
yeah,
I of course I do. That's I mean, we've got there are situations where um but yeah, no, but for me, for zoning and the way we've defined things, it's that city water and sewer. That's
yeah. So if they
or
get a
state
per,
or state permit, right?
yeah. So if they get their permits, if they need to connect and they get permits, right? That's one thing. And you're from a zoning perspective, you're okay with it. The building code is a Michelle question. And then
Yep.
in terms of the camping, I mean, again, that is a different. I just think we should extend the time period. Anyway, I don't need to talk anymore about it. But thanks for humoring me tonight, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
'Cause I do know at least two people that live in yurts and someone else that lives in either like an RV or a small home.
Mhm.
Are those considered camping under the definition of camping?
So, it would depend on the whole situation, right? Like the people with health and safety code and everything else, if people are living in an RV and it's staying there and they don't have those permits, the water and sewer, it becomes a gray area to some degree. Like if sometimes the state has signed off on a particular situation, and so we sort of let it sit, but if they haven't gotten a permit for that to be a dwelling unit, then it's probably camping.
And the permit would come from the state?
The water, so if they're not in a place where they are hooked up to city water and sewer, then they have to get a state wastewater permit, potable water and wastewater permit.
Yeah.
Because for me to issue a permit for the dwelling unit, they're
You need
supposed to have that authorization, either be connected to city water and sewer or have the state potable water and wastewater.
Right.
Because that's how we can confirm they have sanitation,
Right.
compliant sanitation.
Right. I mean, I do think it's like indicative of the housing crisis that I'm guessing people do this on the DL. You know, like because they're desperate for a solution, and this is to them a possible solution.
You know, and the big, I mean, there are times where there is some discretion in enforcement and times where there isn't.
Right. Yeah.
It looks like Alan has his hand up. So you'd have to call on him, Aaron.
Alan, do you have something you want to add?
I do. Am I coming through?
You are. Yes.
Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. I can see we're not a big group. I appreciate all your dedication. I have a unique situation because mine's not going to be for housing for folks that are going to be challenged. I steward this lovely, beautiful piece of land, and we do a lot of camping over the different years. And so some of those restrictions I was concerned about. It says we can have a recreational or camping unit per parcel. Well, I appreciate on a half acre or a quarter acre that might be very relevant, but some of my parcels are hundreds of acres. So we would ask that might be able to be broadened for certain situations. And then the other thing too is sometimes we do winter camping for youths that are dealing with different social challenges. And so we would like to be able to keep doing those kinds of programs. Winter camping meant a lot to me, and to build those kinds of bonds. And so I know you're addressing a lot of the challenges where people, I think, are pushing these limits. They're changing camping units into like a residential space. We would not be doing that. You know, we'd be using it only recreationally. And I appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you.
And of course, I'm open to any questions or any comments.
Yeah, I don't have any questions at the moment to respond to, but I just wrote that down, and I think it's helpful for consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And again, we would not try to be using it to create units for residents. It would be mostly for recreational purposes and to help young people enjoy being out winter camping like I used to.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, happy holidays, and thank you all for working so hard.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Okay. If nobody has any other questions or comments on camping or campground, whoops, sorry, went too far. Problem of not having a mouse I can use right now. Maria, you asked about bed and breakfast, inns, hotels, congregate living, short-term rentals, Airbnbs. So we think of in zoning world, there are specific definitions in here for inns versus hotels versus bed and breakfasts. Because there are ways to differentiate between those different uses based on the building or the number of people that stay there,
Mhm.
right? And congregate living comes in a little differently because we think of residential uses as ones where you can have a lease that extends for a certain amount of time beyond, that for there it's residential is like the more than 30 days.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why those are all differentiated from each other in different ways because congregate living, residential use, you've got that longer lease, it's more than 30 days. And even there, it gets a little tricky to try and differentiate for zoning purposes and be like, oh, you got to give me a copy of your, whatever your lease is. We don't really do that. We kind of are trusting people to give us that information. With Airbnb, you're digging down even further to needing to look at different financial arrangements. So somebody could Airbnb out just a bedroom for
Right.
1 week while they're away for, 1 week out of a year versus somebody who has a duplex and has one set up as a unit that they're Airbnb all the time, or an inn or a hotel could say, hey, we're going to just use Airbnb to help us, have these rooms let out for short term. So trying to bring that into a zoning perspective and be able to catch it when people are making changes to their structures, or getting new tenants is really hard, which is, I think, why the housing committee decided to go their route at this point to try and get the Airbnb register to keep track of those in a different way outside of the zoning purview. Because it's a really hard one to stick into and be able to enforce on the zoning perspective. And try and capture that.
I mean, I feel I totally understand because every city is also kind of struggling with this question of what is an Airbnb and how does it fit into zoning. But there is an element of, if I created an app and people could sign up to get their car washed at my place of business, or I'll call it my house, and they show up and I clean their cars and then they pay me through the app. And maybe eventually I have like a structure that like helps me clean the cars, but it's still just app based. Would we say that I'm not operating a car wash? It's like if
Well,
it
but
quacks like a duck, looks like a duck.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these different like Airbnb, I bought John and Betsy's bed and breakfast and I live daily seeing the effects and what they had to put in place in order to operate it as a B&B. All the different, I mean, we have smoke alarms coming out of our eyeballs, like they're all of the exterior lighting, like there's like all these things that they had to install to run a B&B in town. And it's odd to me that somebody could just call it something differently and not have to satisfy those criteria.
So when we find those where it is a commercial, more public space, especially if it is the different rooms and it's more like an Airbnb,
yeah,
building code comes into play. And that's where the smoke detectors, all those things come from. So
okay,
that's still, I see where you're coming from, but I also, it's the layering, right? How do you parse those out? If somebody is running, even if they're running it through Airbnb, the new like boutique hotel space that's going in, right? They got their permits to make it a hotel.
I'm sure they did.
But
they're doing it the legal way.
Yes, yeah. And when we find out about, I mean, that's it also has to come into play for, say, E911, right? So when we find out about them, if it is a multiple unit situation where some of them are being leased out as their own little clumps, or they have multiple rooms, right?
Right.
We have to be able to say, okay, we now need you to come in, and even if you don't need if you don't need a zoning permit separately for it, you still have to comply with E911, have everything appropriately numbered. There are other layers of regulation that do still come into play and kick in, but I don't know as zoning is the way to do it and be able to parse out the differences.
But
To call
zoning-
something Airbnb, right? If
Yeah.
if you just say Airbnb as a category in here, it doesn't let us parse out the differences
Right.
between somebody occasionally leasing out one room
Right, it's too
when
broad
they're
of
on
an
vacation.
umbrella.
It's too broad. If somebody trips some of these categories, we
Mhm.
snag them for zoning,
Okay.
right?
So you
If one of these, if we find out somebody has something that really falls onto a B&B or an inn, once we find out about it, yeah, you need to, doesn't matter how you're leasing it out or how you're advertising it. If you fit one of these categories, you need a zoning permit. Same with building code. If they are suddenly becoming a public space and people are sleeping on the third floor, they need to now comply with the commercial fire code. So we still, it is still we have to know about it, but that comes into play with people just putting in residential units on the third floor or adding another unit. We find out about things when there's a complaint a lot of times, or somebody's like, hey, did you see all the construction, all the new, paneling and siding that's going in inside, that somebody they're bringing up to the third floor. And we're like, nope, we'll give them a call. I don't think the Airbnb gives us any other weapons. Or knowledge, right? The searching the Airbnb systems,
Right.
right? The assessor does that. We try and do that to catch for the fire and safety code and the E911, because those are really key health and safety matters. We search, look for those things, and then loop it back through if we're like, what you're doing is really an inn, so you need to get a permit for an inn.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, I didn't realize the city was kind of like classifying Airbnb sometimes as inns or B&Bs.
I mean, we look at it on these categories of how many rooms are you
Yeah.
letting out, right? Like I said, if it's somebody just has posted something because they're going to be on vacation to Europe for a month, we're not going to worry about
I
that.
think
It's
that's
their
like
whole
the
house,
original
right?
intention of Airbnb, but then
Yeah.
it became like a business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Airbnb and the other apps where
Right.
people do that as well. I think there's a push to actually get the registry, short-term rental registry, actually effective and moving. Because that still hasn't.
Is that at city council? Like, where is that?
So it got adopted, but without all the pieces it needed to
Mhm.
actually go into effect, and was kind of confusing.
Hmm.
And then we had a changeover in staff in our office, and the housing committee got wiped out, and now is reinvigorated. So I wouldn't be surprised if that gets up and running
Okay.
again in the next, or not again, gets up and running in maybe 6 months or so to get that
Okay.
registry going, but that we have to have the systems in place to do it.
Yeah,
and
I
make
mean,
it
the
work.
housing committee at one point released some statement on how many units of Airbnbs were in town. It was
Yeah.
like a shocking number of apartments were being used for Airbnb,
I
like solely used for.
I'm not sure what
yeah.
the number was.
I forget what it was. I remember seeing like a news release.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, somebody comes to me with something and say, you fit in this window, then they get a permit.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on these? Okay. Then we are going to really skip through way down to the bottom, because everything else in here, to my mind, is either a business, or it has something to do with high tech. So the satellite dish antennas, energy generation facilities, utility facilities, wireless communications facilities, those are all, some of these are really long sections, but don't really have anything to do with residential in my mind. So I'm going to touch on the, oops, went too far. So we do have in here is the parcel line adjustment and parcel merger. So for anybody who, I think we made this change back in July, or it was the revisions before that, where we moved our boundary line adjustments out of subdivision so that we weren't having to apply all of the subdivision standards to boundary line adjustments. Boundary line adjustments do not create new parcels. It's just shifting a line, or potentially getting rid of a parcel line and merging two parcels into one.
I'm sorry, where are you?
Sorry, I didn't tell you. Section 3125.
Thank you.
Sorry, you don't have a computer in front of you to see the
Yeah.
green, and you can't really read
Just wanted to
that.
make sure I'm.
Way at the end, section 3125, parcel line adjustment, parcel merger. So these are administrative. There's, I've done quite a few of these. I've had people who buy two parcels, merge the parcels to make it easier for them to do residential development that complies, or neighbors, exchange a section of a parcel and we just move the property line. So there have been some activities with these that have helped some small scale development make more sense and be easier to do. But it's nothing that's gonna, I don't see there's any changes that need to happen there, but I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of what that provision meant. And then here at the end of chapter 310, we have section 3126. So this is emergency housing. This was added shortly after the flood, when FEMA was considering doing their large housing development up at Country Club Road. Emergency housing is not the same thing as an emergency shelter. So an emergency shelter is very much the, go in, spend the night. We're working on lots of those. City Council just approved the basement of City Hall, part of it becoming a cold weather emergency shelter, at least for this winter. Emergency housing is about specifically government provided housing, and giving them exemptions so that if the state or the federal government needs again to provide a whole bunch of housing really quick, that those don't need as much zoning approval, that it's a permitted use, so there's no conditional uses for this. It doesn't matter how many units are going in. And that site plan, any other reviews that might be triggered that would normally go to the DRB are just administrative, unless it's a variance, which is the highest degree of exception to a rule, or an appeal. That everything else is administrative. Tried to really streamline this when we thought that the FEMA housing was happening up at Country Club Road. And then it never happened, but we've left this in here because we want to be prepared in case in the future it is needed.
Is that 3-year term limit that FEMA like mandated?
I don't think that's mandated by FEMA. I think that the city got that agreement to be able to put that in there because originally this was going to be specifically for Country Club Road. And so there was discussion back and forth, and I think FEMA had said, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a while ago, that they were like, oh, they'll just need it for a year, maybe 2. And we're like, we're going to give you 3 because we know how hard it can be sometimes to find, like, we knew what the housing market already was before the flood. But the city didn't want to tie up its land indefinitely when there was so much invested in that, and public money was invested in the land and needed to be able to do something other than what was essentially going to be a very large trailer park.
And that's sort of my question, is just seeing kind of the fallout from the floods a couple of years ago. I wonder if 3 years it seems
Mm.
reasonable, but given how things have played out with some parcels in
Yeah.
town,
Yeah.
I wonder
So,
if 3 years is gonna be enough.
well, and I mean, it also comes down to, so in that particular, because I mean, I was days away from issuing the permit when suddenly everything got pulled.
Yeah.
For that particular arrangement up at Country Club Road, the FEMA housing was going to be in a limited area of that parcel. And the agreement was that FEMA was going to pay the city money through that whole period, and it was going to be, and which would then cover having put in the infrastructure all the way up to where the housing was. It was going to be city water and sewer and power and updates to the road and all of that to that location. And then even while they were there, we could have developed past them, or the city could have developed past them, sold other land to other developers without disturbing the houses that were there. So there was definitely contingencies in place in case it went longer. And there was a ability to then amend that permit to be other kinds of housing or do something else. And just be able to have them come back in and get other approvals. But I think it's having the emergency housing permit for valid for 3 years means after that, okay, you should probably come back and meet the landscaping requirements to the degree you're supposed to, because clearly you're going to be here for longer than 3 years. You need to come back, upgrade your screening, do X, Y, and Z to meet the standards we have in place at the time. I think was the thought there, if I remember correctly.
You said sorry, I was unaware of all of these happenings. You said you were a few days away from that permit, and
Yeah.
what happened there? Sorry.
FEMA found what they considered appropriate housing for everybody that they thought they were gonna put in.
Got it.
Like everybody was geared up and ready to go
Yeah.
on our end, and we were like waiting for FEMA to pull the trigger, and then suddenly they backed off and were like, nope, we don't need it anymore because we found housing for everybody
Yep.
that they felt they needed to provide housing for.
Right.
Which
It's probably not everybody, but
well, and wasn't necessarily, it meant everybody that they felt they were able to capture had some sort of roof over their head, and so
Yep.
they stopped pushing on it, which
Yep.
was a real bummer, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But
something we had no control over.
We had no control over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Everything was all lined up on the city's end. The city was all ready to go along with, sign the contract, get the permits issued, do everything.
Right.
And then the federal government pulled out of it.
Got it.
So that's the residential parts of chapter 310.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have questions about other aspects of it.
I only had one to go back to, which was looking at the ADUs, and you said there was and I saw this elsewhere, an amendment that allows up to 6 units.
Mm-hmm.
And what we just reviewed is that it can be no larger than 900 square feet. That's in the in this 310 chapter. Is that per unit? Is that total?
That is the size of the ADU, the square footage, usable square footage inside the ADU.
Yeah.
So to qualify as an accessory dwelling unit specifically versus just a second regular unit,
Yeah.
there's that limit. And it whatever that is should be matching with what the state definition is.
Yeah.
And I can double check again to make sure it actually does.
Yeah, I'm just picturing 6 units within 900 square feet. Is that
No,
the
no,
correct
once
math I'm doing?
you have more than 2 dwelling units on a parcel,
Oh, it's no
nothing
longer
qualifies as an
considered-
accessory
okay.
dwelling unit.
It's no longer considered an ADU.
none of them are considered ADUs. Accessory dwelling units per the state statute are specifically one additional
Understood.
dwelling unit on the parcel other than the original primary unit.
Yep.
And then once you add a third, none of them are considered accessory dwelling units. You don't get the benefits and the bonuses
Got it.
assigned to having an ADU.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
900 square feet is also the minimum. Well, you can have a bigger than 900 square feet, 30% of the total habitable floor area of the
Yeah.
primary dwelling,
Thank you.
whichever is greater. So it's nice.
The ADU does not exceed 900 square feet or 30% of the total habitable floor area.
So
Doesn't it say whichever is greater?
Whichever is
Yeah,
greater.
whichever is greater.
It's phrased a
Pretty
little
sure that's the
awkwardly.
state statute. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that's the state statute.
Cool.
Sorry, like I said, I can't like scroll in the background to find my
Yeah, I'll get-
my things without making everybody dizzy.
Somebody with a 10,000 square foot house is like, I'm gonna put a little ADU outside. It's 3,000 square feet.
Any other questions? I mean, that's all of chapter 310, and I hit just the highlights.
Yeah, thanks. I was just reading really quickly through the other sort of commercial special uses, but I didn't see anything that really. But this is more just curiosity.
Mhm.
Are there satellite dishes going up still? Is
So
that really
those
a
are
thing?
I'm trying to remember. I haven't used that at all.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to even remember because it's satellite dish antennas, right? So I'm like, I maybe have read that provision once.
Yeah. Isn't
Yeah, no, I mean we don't honestly, if people are putting up some of those still,
yeah, I mean
we aren't paying any attention to them
I think it's fine to leave it
whatsoever.
in just in case somebody does, but
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of funny. It's like,
Yeah, no, it is. I think it's, it's still there, but honestly, we haven't been paying any attention to them.
to me, it's like analogous, like zoning for where you put your your hardline phone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, does anybody online have any questions or comments?
Nope.
Okay.
Also,
well-
thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Meredith, for doing that for us. It's really been helpful. I don't have any questions or anything else. Do you, Maria? No?
My only question is, do we plan ahead at all for next time to prepare ourselves at all for what's coming next?
Site plan is
Site
next.
plan. Okay, great.
So that'll be kind of a hefty one,
Yeah.
especially because there's definitely things in there that have been flagged
Right.
as needing or some people wanting revisions to them.
And
So that might be a couple of meetings potentially.
yeah, and I'll talk to Meredith and Mike offline and then send out a little email reminder for everybody to take a look at that.
Excellent. That was helpful this past round as well.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes, everybody just needs a little reminder to put their eyes on this stuff. And okay, unless there's anything else, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I will motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
I will second.
Seconded by Maria. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Any opposed? Nope, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a good holiday.